A revelation dawns, a structure appears, a monumental discovery is made, an ancient Egyptian tomb found entirely intact. Then, the financier of the expedition, George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, suddenly passed away from a wound in the exact position as the unwrapped mummy, fueling rumors about a mummy's curse. If gossip were to be believed, lights went out in Cairo at the exact moment of Herbert's death, and his pet dog in England dropped dead after letting out a loud howl. Newspapers went rabid. Those most intimately connected with during the last few months suffered in some way or other. Even the journalists who covered the story have felt the reaction. 3 of them have been ill. Arthur Conan Doyle's speculations about ancient curses for the tomb's protection further spurred public mania. It is I who hinder the sand from choking the secret chamber. I am for the protection of the deceased. From an Anubis shrine found in King Tut's tomb, George Herbert had suffered a mosquito bite, which he cut while shaving, infecting the wound. Howard Carter, the lead archaeologist at the expedition, dismissed any connection with superstitious elements, calling them Tommy rot. The sensationalist news cycle helped emphasize the magnitude of the archaeological find. Howard Carter and the assistant curator of the Metropolitan Museum of Art were reported saying, "Archaeology under the limelight is a new and rather bewildering experience for most of us. All of a sudden, we find the world takes an interest in us, an interest so intense and so avid for details that special correspondents at large salaries have to be sent to interview us, report our every movement, and hide around corners to surprise a secret out of us." It was the first ancient Egyptian tomb that had been unearthed in near-perfect conditions, and the press was busy engineering drama. But why was the tomb unfettered? How did it remain intact for so long? The tomb's seal was unbroken for almost 3,300 years. And why is it an outlier? And why were other tombs broken in? To answer all these questions, we must dive into ancient Egyptian history to discuss who this King Tut fella was before making a foray into archaeology. King Tutankhamun, shortened to King Tut for ease, was the 3rd last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty or Thutmosid dynasty. The 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt belongs to the New Kingdom period, known for its economic prosperity and relative political stability. But there is one small period when all hell broke loose, the 17-year span of the Amarna period. The heretic king, Akhenaten, built his own capital, Amun, introduced his own religion, worship of the one god, Aten, and changed cultural, social, and artistic norms. You can check out our video on Akhenaten and the Amarna period for more details. There's a link in the description. Anyway, Akhenaten and his wife Nefertiti introduced monotheistic beliefs and practices that irked everyone, especially the Amun priests. The couple subjugated them to stagnate their socio-political authority. Their son, or at least who most Egyptologists believe to be his son, Tutankhamun, the manifestation of Aten on earth, fell under the sway of evil, the Amun priests. So he changed his name from Tutankhamun to Tutankhamun. Now, the subsequent Egyptian kings were not fond of Akhenaten's shenanigans, nor were they fans of his wife Nefertiti, and they tried to erase him from history because, as they say, history is written by the victor. Horemheb, the last pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, was particularly adamant about removing Akhenaten's heresy from the books. But why, you might ask? In Egyptian culture and history, we see this idea of static hierarchies and strictly enforced status quo. Their religion presented a concept of timelessness, along with the right actions to ensure adherence to that timelessness. That is why they had mummies and believed that death was but a phase, like teenage, because time is static, circular, and eternal, and life goes on forever. Horemheb and other subsequent pharaohs thought Akhenaten and his memory were deviations from the preordained structure. For the longest time, nobody knew who Akhenaten and Tutankhamun were. That is, until one day, a tomb was found in pristine condition, archaeologically speaking at least, and the entire world lay in wait for the outpouring of mysteries. Horemheb destroyed Akhenaten's temples and carried off stones from his capital city to other sites for construction. Any monument that reminded the public of Akhenaten, he destroyed it. He also erased Akhenaten's wife Nefertiti and their son Tutankhamun, so that no one could trace them back to the heretic king. This seems like a weird choice, initially because Tutankhamun was critical of his father's policies and had voiced his opinion about the damage they'd done. He wrote in a stela, "When I became king, the temples were in disarray. There were weeds growing in them. All the statues of the gods had been melted down. The military was not respected. If it rode off, nobody attended." There must have been tons of inscriptions with Tutankhamun's name, like the one we mentioned. Well, not anymore because Mr. Horemheb deemed it appropriate to replace their names with his. In effect, he carted all their achievements to his lot. In the restoration stela that we've mentioned, Horemheb replaced Tut's name with his own. So we know why we didn't know about Akhenaten, Nefertiti and Tutankhamun, but why had archaeologists never found an intact tomb of any pharaoh? A timely and pertinent question indeed. The pharaoh had irreproachable authority in Egyptian society, and the priests ran the show. The social dynamic was incredibly lopsided in the Old and Middle Kingdoms. In the New Kingdom, we see a slight digression from this trend. Since it was a time of economic affluence, we witness, for the first time really, non-royal art in Egyptian history. But this was no utopia, and inequality still existed, so the most desperate resorted to robbing graves. Since Egyptians believed in everlasting life, their emperors were buried with enough food to sustain them for years. Exploiting tombs for immediate needs was an excellent remedy for people who were barely afloat. Up until the 20th century, and even today, grave robbers have been a serious concern in these parts. So discovering a tomb in pristine condition, archaeologically speaking at least, after all these years was a significant achievement, and it came at just the right time for our lead archaeologist. In early 1922, Howard Carter must have felt he had been dealt a bad hand. His recent campaigns, spanning almost 11 years, were largely unsuccessful, and the future looked no better. Experts repeatedly warned him that looking for King Tut's tomb was a lost cause. Most people thought robbers had raided it, but Carter was a tough cookie. His financial backer, George Herbert, told him it was his last chance. So he continued his work at the Valley of Kings in Thebes, picking one place to dig, then another, then another, then another, until one day he struck gold. To be exact, the water boy struck a stone with his foot and cried out. The stone turned out to be part of the stairs that led somewhere underground. He started digging, and upon finding proof that there was indeed something of archaeological value there, hid it back under the sand to avoid robbers. When Lord Carnarvon received word of this momentous accomplishment, he hurried to join the gang. As they descended, Carnarvon asked Carter what he said, to which he apparently replied, "Wondrous things." Wondrous things indeed. The fascinating thing about the tomb is that it had been broken into before, at least twice, but the robbers had only taken small things. They had left the jolly good Tutankhamun intact, and it happened a long time ago, so the doors were sealed shut by the ancient officials afterwards. How the hell do we know this? Well, because when Carter and his crew first entered the place, they realized that many items had been haphazardly repositioned to their supposed original locations. All of this is well and good, but now we have to look into the practical influence of this historic find. This event was huge for the field of archaeology. It had been a legitimate field of study, but this was its coming out party. People started envying archaeologists, thinking whether they could become one themselves and start traveling around exotic places in search of hidden treasure. What mysterious adventures await these people? Carnarvon's death a few weeks later sparked controversy, and illnesses among the crew spurred the issue on. But the crew couldn't concern themselves with the press. They had work to do. The king's tomb was found under almost 150,000 rocks, and the real work started after that. Whew. Cataloguing everything, doing whatever it is that archaeologists do with things, and then going to study them. Carter was no slouch. He understood the gravity of the situation and wanted everything done by the book. In fact, he wanted to write a new book. He introduced a ton of new techniques that became the mainstays of the discipline. Harry Burton, who had a reputation as the finest archaeological photographer of his time, employed electric lighting. He worked on the tomb for almost 10 years, not exclusively, capturing nearly 3,400 images. But before he could do all that, Carter placed numbered cards next to every item and took extensive notes. However, the most crucial archaeological milestone was probably the progression of our understanding of ancient Egypt. Before the discovery of King Tut's tomb, Egyptian chronology was a mess. hard to understand all over the place, and everyone had their version. The event also helped scholars understand a lot of Egyptian beliefs and rituals, especially concerning death. And what about King Tut himself? Well, he changed his name to distance himself from his father. He could not cope with the radical new beliefs of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. He wanted to restore order and return to normalcy. He even changed his name to the Son of the Amen to appease the people. He packed up the Amarna site and moved the capital back to Thebes. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not a progressive or even an authoritative figure, but a victim of peer pressure. Even after all this, his rule was relatively short and uninspired. He died prematurely without any clear heirs. DNA research suggests that he might have been born of incest, and his successors ensured that he got a clean slate. According to Egyptologist Kara Cooney, they didn't talk about them, they're not on kings' lists, they're not recorded in temple walls. In reality, King Tutankhamun was a fairly low-register Egyptian king. He didn't do much, nor was he on the throne for long. It is in fact his lack of importance that allowed his tomb to survive undisturbed. King Tut's reign was so unnoteworthy as to be in itself noteworthy, as David Mitchell would put it. But another reason for the frantic obsession was the end of the First World War. People were broken and looking for an outlet. Tut's body had wounds and injuries. There was a boy king from 3,000 years ago, as torn and shredded from the war as a World War I veteran. It brings some much-needed perspective in the aftermath of war, understanding that you're not the only one. That war has existed since the beginning of time and shall exist until its end. It sounds almost like the Egyptian belief, doesn't it? That old belief that life goes on forever in a preordained manner and that everything comes full circle. What do you think about the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb? Should we assign such importance to him, given that he's not really a significant historical figure? Let us know in the comments. If you want to know more about Akhenaten and the Amarna period, here's an earlier video for that. Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll see you in the next one.